I was first appointed in 1986 on a part-time contract, which eventually became permanent. And I taught various units, various courses, but eventually focused upon human rights, which became my specialism. And back in 2005, having taught various human rights courses with other colleagues, in 2005, I had the opportunity to design and launch my own human rights module, a human rights unit which I called Human Rights in Law, Politics and Society. And this was a kind of bird's eye view of the human rights landscape, not really concentrating on any specific human rights as such, but about institutions, processes, paradigms, that kind of thing. One of the issues was, well, what's going to be covered? And I decided that one of the topics should be Islam, China, and the Far East, because the Cold War had ended and the debate, the international debate, the big international political debate was no longer being conducted in terms of the West and the Soviet system. It was now the West and the rest. And amongst the rest, the only two really prominent paradigms were the Islamic world and the Far East, especially China. So that went in. It went in right from the offset. The law school was satisfied with that. The students were satisfied with that. It was one of the most popular topics. It appeared in the exam, and it was a favorite question to be addressed by students in the exam. The law school audited the unit and the module on an annual basis. I had colleagues sit in on it, and in fact, they tended to come to that module as well. They said it was great. It was very, very rigorous, very topical. External examiners praised the course and the module for their academic credibility and so on and so forth. Almost out of the blue, in 2020, and in the autumn of 2020, I was informed by my head of school that there'd been a complaint from the president of the University Islamic Society. He didn't know what it was. He thought it was not really a very serious complaint because the head of the Islamic Society is a medical student and hadn't attended any of the relevant courses or read any of the relevant literature. So we both sort of waited to see what would happen. And then in mid-February 2021, my world was turned upside down when I became aware that there was a savage social media campaign had been launched by the Islamic Society, BRISOC, as they call themselves, to have me to require me to apologize or to be sacked and for the module to be cancelled, the Islam, China, and the Far East module to be cancelled by the university on the grounds that it was Islamophobic and I was Islamophobic. And pretty much everything I'd been saying in most of my recent public output and in my classes was by they complained was Islamophobic. The ridiculous absurdity of it was that they accused me of being Islamophobic for having simply retailed or reported features of Islam and human rights and features of Islamic history, which are commonplace in the literature. Let me give you a few examples. They said that it's Islamophobic to claim that Islam spread particularly in its early history through war, conquest, trade and conversion. Apparently that's Islamophobic, but that's simply a fact. They also said it's Islamophobic to regard the Quran as non-systematic, non-thematic, and delivered to an audience or readers, an audience which was already familiar with its message. Again, if you read the Quran yourself, you will see that it's very difficult to find thematic organization. It's recognized that it's not chronological like the Bible, for example, nor any of the verses or the surah organized in any obviously every thematic manner. In fact, the Quran is organized in accordance with the length of the verses. So the longer verses all go together, the shorter verses all go together. That's Islamophobic. It's Islamophobic to claim that Islam traditionally has difficulties with democracy. It's Islamophobic to claim that there are some human rights with which traditional Islam is in friction, the right to freedom of expression, because criticism of the faith is punishable and punishable by death, and right to freedom of thought, conscience, religion, because apostasy is punishable in traditional Islam, and in some places still by death. Minorities, women's rights, harsh punishments, all the kind of classic features of the debate that are commonly in circulation and are widely reported in the authoritative literature. The other thing that really exercised them was the when I said that the Charlie Hebdo massacre in Paris some years back could be seen as an example of an execution for blasphemy by freelancers, which is also in traditional Islam was also carried out by the state. And of course, as I said, some contemporary Muslim states do still have capital punishment for. Bristock thought that was terribly Islamophobic. The fear and the sense of threat that I was under was because anybody who's publicly denounced as an Islamophobe is vulnerable to being murdered, as happened to Samuel Paty in France. So there are umpteen. I don't know if Samuel Paty I think he did actually have death threats, but the sentence of death, the execution, and the murder occurred very promptly on the heels of that. It's very easy for anybody to find out where I live because there are very few Greers in the telephone directory or the electoral register. So my wife and I took no chances and left to stay with some family far away. The university handled it extraordinarily badly. In fact, it's difficult to imagine how they could have handled it any worse. First of all, they admitted Bristock's complaint back in October 2020, even though it was months past the official deadline, even though it was lodged by somebody who was not party to any of the things complained of, who claimed to be acting on behalf of anonymous students who may or may not have existed, by students who failed to go through all the more informal filtering processes governing complaints. For example, taking it to your personal tutor, taking it to the tutor in question, going to the relevant director of studies, going to the relevant head of school. I mean, there's about half a dozen stages that should have gone through before it went to the university. Bristock didn't observe any of that. The university still chose to admit it. Then the university sat on it for 3-4 months, did nothing. And Bristock threatened the university that if it didn't resolve the complaint promptly and presumably in its favour, Bristock, would go public, as they put it. Now, at that stage, the university should have warned them and said, if you go public about this, it'll be a breach of your duty of confidentiality with respect to the complaint, and you will be disciplined. That didn't happen. So Bristock did go public with the petition for my dismissal, etc., etc., etc. And also, the risk to my personal safety that this necessarily implied. And the university still didn't discipline them. The only thing the university did was to remind them of their duty of confidentiality, which by this stage had been, no longer existed because the whole issue was out in the public domain. But the university insisted that I maintain my duty of confidentiality. So what it meant was Bristock had an open goal. They were saying all kinds of things, not only on the petition, the formal petition, and the complaint that was attached to that, but on social media they were saying all kinds of things about me being horrible and stupid. Even, how could somebody who's a professor of human rights be so stupid? Was a common theme in the various social media stuff that was kicking off. And I wasn't in a position to defend myself. And the Al Jazeera report would just assumed, because I couldn't defend, the only thing it said about me was Professor Greer denies the accusations and is not allowed to say why, because he's under duty of confidentiality. All the rest of the Al Jazeera report assumed that what the students were saying was true. And this indeed was also true at the university and the law school's initial reaction. They emailed students, and the tone of it was very much, oh my God, there's been a terrible outbreak of Islamophobia in the law school on the part of a lecturer. If anybody's been affected by it, please get in touch. Da, 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 da. Never said, if anybody disputes this, please get in touch. And the university didn't even initially say that I denied the accusations. I had to remind them that when they were talking about this to say I denied it. So then the investigation takes place, 5 months, very thorough. I'm completely exonerated because I wasn't Islamophobic, wasn't saying anything Islamophobic. British appeals to a 3-judge panel, a 3-person panel at the university. They reject their appeal. The university announces my exoneration, and at the same time takes the module, the Islam, China, Far East module, off the syllabus, and says that although I've been exonerated, they recognise Bristol's concerns and they took the module off the syllabus to protect the sensitivities of students. So it's clearly an attempt to undermine the verdict of their own independent inquiry, and to, as has been said, to cast aspersions on my innocence. I had been looking forward to retirement at the age of 66 in the autumn of 2022. So this is all kicking off. I was exonerated in July of 2021. But then, because there was this aspersion cast upon my innocence, I felt I couldn't return to teaching the course Human Rights and Law, Politics and Society without the Islam module, because it would look like I was accepting that I was in fact guilty. And this whole thing had taken such a toll on my mental health. I was signed off work by my doctor for 3 months through the autumn of 2021 until the January 2022. And then there was an issue about what am I going to do? So it stalled. I didn't get any other teaching. I did some marking, so I wasn't technically, dismissed. I was still on the university's payroll, and then I went on retirement as I'd intended. One of the enduring consequences, of course, is that I haven't been able to carry on part-time teaching as many people who retire in academia do, because the whole thing is just so sour now. I couldn't do it. So, yes, I mean, basically, the way the Free Speech Union has put it, I was sidelined after this whole fiasco. The university basically sidelined me and couldn't wait until I actually left the premises. The initiative to take the Islam, China and the Far East module off it came from 2 very, very junior colleagues who'd only recently joined. I taught this unit on my own for nearly 15 years. And because I was about to retire, I was, preparing, I had to prepare some other people to teach it. They refused to teach the Islam and China and the Far East module because they were afraid of further complaints. So because it was 2 against 1, the head of school said, that's all right, you can take it off the syllabus. So that's what happened. And the university then, of course, took ownership of that by announcing what it did in October 2021. And as far as I'm aware, I mean, I've lost, touch with these people. I can't communicate with them anymore. Again, that's another thing that's been very, very soured and very compromised. But as far as I know, the unit continues without the Islam, China and Far East module. I think it's partly cowardly. It's partly about trying to protect its own reputation. The University of Bristol does very, very badly on inclusivity. It's near the bottom of the inclusivity league tables. So it's very, very conscious of trying to cultivate a more positive image with minorities. Therefore, I think it felt that it could not, there were dangers for its reputation in not acceding to the student's complaint. Yes, I began to notice that more junior colleagues were more left wing than I was. I mean, I thought at the time I was quite left wing, although I was probably more centre left. They were more left wing and less tolerant. And also, what I discovered was that I was finding it more difficult to publish academic articles, particularly about the Prevent program, that were being rejected, not on the basis of their academic credentials, but on the basis of the conclusion was not what the reviewers really wanted to hear or see. I've been lucky in that I've been able to publish pretty much what I want, where I want, earlier in my career. And I find this is becoming increasingly difficult later in my career. It all depends how it's enforced. I've been reading through the guidance, the newly released guidance from the Office for Students, and it's all very welcome. What's particularly welcome is not that it actually changes the law in any particular way. It just simply explains what it should have been, how it should have been understood all along. But the fundamental question is not the guidance and not the provisions, but how they're enforced, because there have been statutory obligations on the part on universities to defend academic freedom since the mid 1980s. Two big pieces of legislation then, another one in 2017, and they've not been able to. They're effectively unenforceable. Universities, including the University of Bristol, had fairly reputable free speech, academic freedom codes, but they simply ignored them in my case. The way they mishandled the complaint was a kind of textbook exercise in how not to enforce and how not to observe academic freedom and free speech and freedom of expression in the academic context. So the HEFSA is welcome. The new guidelines are welcome, but the proof of the pudding will be in how effectively they're enforced. And this is why I greatly welcome, the fine that was imposed upon the University of Sussex with respect to the Kathleen Stock fiasco. And I hope that the recent referral of my case and other cases, that I'm not the only case in Bristol, by the way, but probably possibly the most egregious, how the University of Bristol should be held accountable in a similar way as the University of Sussex.